I thought I'd do this in a video because it's just easier to tell the story than to type it out on a smartphone. But I've just been listening to Coast to Coast all day. I drive a truck for a living. I'm in my truck now, actually. I'm out here in Utah, in the canyons of all places in the world. I'm actually, because of the story I'm going to tell you, which actually happened roughly 33 years ago. I was 13 or 14. I'm 46 now. I've never been able to go night fishing again by myself or camping again by myself, or I have a hard time being out in the woods by myself, which sucks because I love the woods. I've actually gotten a little bit better with it from being out here in the canyons, but there's still things that spook me because there's things that I recognize, especially when I'm out in the woods. When it gets silent, it's just, I can't stay. I gotta, as long as there's at least one more person with me, I'm okay, but I can't be out in the woods by myself anymore, even in, like I said, it sucks because I love the woods. I've been in the woods. You know, I grew up in the woods. I grew up in the woods hunting with my dad and fishing, and that was a big thing too. I love trout fishing, and it changed a lot of things that I do with even, you know, my last years up there in New York. You know, I grew up on the Neversink River. Even when we lived in Jersey, we'd go up to the Neversink River and go fishing, and there's a lot of places that I used to go fishing where I wouldn't go anymore by myself even. It's just, it's a bizarre story. This story, I guess it was maybe 1987 or 1988. I was 13 or 14. Looking back on it, I know for sure it was 13 or 14. I can't remember exactly which. I know it was somewhere either just before or just after we went and got Noriega in Panama. So it could have been the summer just after that, or it could have been just before that. Probably, I'm thinking probably late August. It was in the Neversink Reservoir. We lived not far from the Neversink Reservoir, and there's a lot of things that were strange where we lived in the woods that until this night we never really put it together, even though my dad told stories about, especially the Wanacue Reservoir, where we're from West Milford, New Jersey. And actually my dad worked on the construction with the Wanacue Reservoir even, and he used to tell some weird stories about some things he's seen there. He even told some strange stories about Bigfoot-like sightings that he's had more than once with multiple different people around the Wanacue Reservoir. And I'm not going to say that I've ever been a skeptic of Bigfoot, but I was never a true believer of Bigfoot, although, you know, I was very well familiar with it. Like I said, first my dad telling the stories, and I can remember always watching the TV shows, you know, about the Yeti, and especially the ones narrated by, what's his name there? Spock. Can't remember his real name. But this night it was me, my dad, and my Uncle Harry. My Uncle Harry left the state within days because of this. We were fishing up in the Neversink Reservoir, and it's an area where, you know, for as long as I can remember going fishing there with my dad, going there night fishing. It was a new moon. It was kind of night that my dad loved to go. You know, we always went up, but you know, the new moon was an awesome night to always go. And my Uncle Harry had this big halogen headlight that he turned into a big spot lamp that he made, and we had our Coleman propane lamps with the bulb, and you know, we had them set up, and we have them where they hang just over top of the water so that they bring the minnows in because they attract the fish. And the area where we were, the reason we're there is there's a creek that comes in, and because of the cool water coming in, and then it turns into a deep channel through there, it's great for trout. And that's our thing, is trout. And depending on what time of year you go there, this area from this side of the shore to the other side of the shore, the night we were there, it's probably about 50 feet wide. There's other times where it could be, 25 feet wide, and then there's other times where it could be over 100 feet wide. But I think that night the water was down fairly low. There's a rock there that's only there when the water is below a certain point, and we were only a few feet from that rock. We actually had a lot of our stuff set up on that rock, so I think it was probably in that range where it was about 50 feet wide at this time. The night started out like any other night. We trekked down in there just before dark and set up and everything, and it gets dark, and we light our lamps, and the minnows are there, and the bats, everything is normal. And I guess around 10, maybe 11 o'clock, we hear an owl across from us. And then we hear a response from another owl off in the distance behind us. And the reason I point this out is I grew up in the woods. My dad grew up in the woods, and we're familiar with wildlife. And my dad had mentioned that, it just didn't sound normal. But then, that's also the time that year when all the there was a lot of sightings in that area of owls from Canada, the Canadian snow owl or something. And so I had mentioned that it could be them Canadian owls. But we're listening to them. And the one over here will go, woo, woo, woo. And then the one in the distance, woo, woo. And they go back and forth like this. This went on for about 30 minutes. And I don't know, I guess it was about 30 minutes or so later, we heard something in the woods behind us. And me and my dad were thinking it probably deer at first, because it's off in the distance. And my Uncle Harry said that it could be a bear. And so we noticed that it was coming closer and closer behind us. It just sounded weird to me. I didn't, I've spent enough time in the woods where something sounded wrong, but I didn't understand what sounded wrong with it. And then my dad said that, it just sounded odd. It's the word he used. He looked back and he's like, that just sounds odd. And my Uncle Harry said, yeah, it's probably a bear. He says, the game warden said that, whenever there's bears around, just chuck rocks up into the tree branches, high up into the tree branches, and it will spook them off. So me and my Uncle Harry, not my dad, just me and my Uncle Harry, start chucking rocks up into the tree branches, and we hear it run off. When it ran, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't understand what was wrong because, it was heavy footsteps for sure. So that made me think, okay, bear, but it just didn't sound right. I've been out in the woods with my father and I've seen bear. And most of the time they're really soft-footed to begin with. But, I guess because I was thinking, the bear running, it didn't click. And we can actually hear it go up past us. And then we heard it go across the creek. And when we heard it go across the creek, my dad looked at me and says, that didn't sound like a bear, did it? And I was like, I don't know. It didn't, I knew it didn't sound right. He said it sounded like it was on 2 feet. And so, after that, we noticed that all the minnows in front of us that were there were all gone. And that's when, started to realize, there's no bats, all the sounds in the woods, everything's just dead quiet. Everything's bum, except for this lapping of water. And we're watching the water in front of us, and there's no real motion in the water. There's a little bit of ripple in the water, but there's no rock motion. So it sounds kind of like, fish maybe jumping or something, although it wasn't really the proper sound. But maybe sometimes the channel cats and catfish, they get up near the shoreline, and so that's the kind of noise we were hearing. And about 20 minutes or so, I don't know, time gets funny in these situations, but my dad's walking away from us and he's fishing with a jitterbug. I remember that because since we heard that since we're thinking that fish are over there lapping on the shoreline, that maybe we can track something with the jitterbug. And my Uncle Harry is over here beside me, and a rock splashes in the water next to him, and he yells at my dad to stop. And we're both looking at my dad, and my dad said, "I didn't throw a rock." And while my dad says he didn't throw a rock splashes in the water next to me. And that just, from that point on, the whole night just went downhill, because I knew my dad didn't throw the rock at me because we're looking at him. And then another rock lays right between me and my Uncle Harry in the water again. And so my Uncle Harry goes and he gets this big spotlight, and he's looking over on the shoreline, and the first thing we see is there's this log up about 30 feet from the shore, and there's this thing standing back there. Because the log is there, there's something there for perspective, and it's a big log, but this log looks small next to this thing that is standing there, and it's standing there on two legs. And the first thing that's going through my mind is, wow, that's a big bear, because I'm thinking bear standing on its hind legs. It's not uncommon to see a bear. But that's when we noticed it dropped the rock. It had a big rock in its hand, and it drops the rock hands. It was holding a big rock, and it dropped the rock when my Uncle Harry put the light on. And that's when my Uncle Harry, he's like, we gotta go. My dad's like, we're not walking through the woods at night. My dad refused to leave, and so we had to hold this out through the whole night. And my Uncle Harry's looking at it, and he just shifted the light a little bit, and we caught a glint of something. And my Uncle Harry brings the light around further, and there's one in the water, and it's cupping water, and it's taking the water and it's splashing the water on a smaller one. And they're the same thing that we're looking up in the woods. And it was just surreal. It's just, my dad went, he came back over, he sat down by the rock, and I sat down by my dad. I didn't know what else to do. I just sat down by my dad, and my Uncle Harry just stayed there with the spotlight on these things, and he wound up shifting the light to the two in the water. And I don't know how long he had the light on the two in the water, but finally they stopped, and the one that was splashing the water just stares over in the direction of us with the light. And the little one starts walking behind what I'm assuming was the mother. Don't know if that was the mother or father. I don't know. I'm assuming it was the mother because it was smaller than the big one that was up by the log, and that's where the real issue comes in, because we heard the splashing in the creek, and my Uncle Harry put the light back on the log, and it wasn't there. And then we could hear it coming up through the woods. But the problem was, while we heard that one coming up through the woods, we could hear something in the woods behind us over here. And then we could start hearing the tree branches snapping. Whatever it was, it never came out of the woods behind us. That, thank God, it never came out of the woods behind us. I'd be, as bad as things are, I don't know what I'd do if it came out of the woods. I don't know what would happen if it came out of the woods, if they came out of the woods. But we could hear tree branches snapping in the woods, and there was no, I watched these. I know they're supposed to be professionals, but I watch these people on that Finding Bigfoot TV show, and I laugh at them because of all the things that they do. There was no grunting, there was no smacking against trees, nothing like that. But something was up there breaking tree branches. And my Uncle Harry put he shined the light as deep as we could see into the woods, and we didn't see nothing. And he shined back across the river, across the cove, and the other two were gone. And eventually we heard one come back across the creek again and go back up into the woods behind the log, and it never came back out again. But we could still hear something, and it was more than one of them back behind us. And this went on all night. And at one point we started hearing the owl calls again, and this time they were right there. We heard it, the whoo whoo, and the whoo whoo, it's just like an owl call, but it wasn't an owl call that we knew being familiar. And that's when we realized that, we're pretty sure that was the call they were using to communicate back and forth. And we heard the noises up in the woods behind us. We could hear tree branches snapping, and eventually the tree branches stopped snapping. And then we can hear across from us they crashing through the woods, and they crossed the creek, and we can hear the other ones going towards the creek, and then we can hear them all going away from the creek. They were going away from us and away from the creek. And we stayed there all night for the rest of the night. I mean, in all honesty, I don't know how long it lasted. When if you understand being scared, you understand that when you're scared, time just, relativity, it just slows down. And minutes feels like hours, and hours just feel like forever. And it just felt like an eternity till the dusk of gray finally came and sunrise was coming, and we could start seeing the cove across from us, and we could start seeing, it start getting lighter and lighter, and we could see up behind us, and we could see into the woods, but we didn't hear nothing else. And finally, we waited till the sun was up, and when the sun got up, I wasn't going anywhere, but my dad and my Uncle Harry decided to walk across it. We really weren't that far from the creek. We were only about 25 yards from the creek where it passed across from us. So my dad and my Uncle Harry go and they look along the creek to see if they could see any footprints or anything. They couldn't find nothing. They went over by where the log and where we saw them in the water, and it's all rocky and there was no footprints or nothing. But there was something that they did find there on the shoreline, which is something that was common to find in the area along creeks and everything, and it was the bed of the freshwater oysters, and just the open shells, and they looked pretty fresh. And there's been a lot of times where I've never thought about it up until that point, where I've always been out in the woods fishing. I love trout fishing, and I go fishing into all these little creeks and stuff like that, and it's not uncommon to see these freshwater oyster beds on the side of the water. And I'd never thought of nothing about them before, but ever since then, whenever I've seen that, I wind up moving on. I couldn't stay there fishing. But that was there, and they were fresh. My dad said they were definitely fresh. So we pack up all our gear, and we went back up to the truck where we parked the truck, my Uncle Harry's little Chevy Love, and it's covered in tree branches. It was covered in tree branches. There was no footprints around. I mean, it was hard packed. It's been dry for days, so that's possible why we didn't see any footprints. But there was no footprints around. I mean, the grass was all beat down, but there was no actual footprints. But the truck was covered in tree branches. So we didn't even take the tree branches. We just got out of there. We just left. And we get home, and my Uncle Harry's hysterical. And he said, I gotta go, get Annie, we're packing up, we're leaving, I'm going, I'm not staying, we're going. And he did. He was packed up, and they went back to New Jersey within 2 days, 3 days. By the end of the weekend, they were gone. It was 2 or 3 days. But my mom, she's like, what happened? And so we told her the story of what happened, just like I told it to you. And my mom got so mad. And she's like, how can you tell me a lie like that? And my Uncle Harry started bawling his eyes out. He's like, Abby, no, this is what happened. And she's like, sit down on the couch. All of you, sit down on the couch. And after you watch this, I want to know where you were last night. Because you were somewhere and you guys were all drinking or something like that. Where were you, Peter? Yeah, it's me. And I told her, I said, we were there, Mom. We were at the reservoir. She's like, no. She's like, watch. This is what you guys watched last night. And she recorded this movie for us. Because like I said, me and my dad, my dad has always told stories about Bigfoot. And I've always loved watching things for Bigfoot. So she recorded this for us. And it's a documentary that I've tried to find again. And I can't find it because I can't remember the exact name of it. But they go through all these different legends of Bigfoot while they're going into British Canada. And at the time, it was investigated by the Kodak film supposedly, and it's been authenticated that they couldn't prove it fake or anything. And at the end, there's this shootout between them and supposed Sasquatch. And I've never been able to find, I don't remember the name of the documentary, so I've never been able to find it again to actually research and see if it was ever debunked or not. But my Uncle Harry was hysterical. And he just couldn't handle it anymore. But the thing that really freaked us out was when they go into the woods prior to the confrontation with the Sasquatch, there's these trees that are snapped. And right behind our house, all along the ridgeline, are trees that are snapped like that. And we've always assumed that it was from a storm that must have passed by through somewhere years ago. No one ever thought that this could have been done intentionally. But it's all along the ridgeline behind our house. And it's our hunting territory. It's our hunting territory. It's where we've always hunted. And they're right there. And there's this one tree where it's actually, it was the weirdest thing. We always wondered how it could have happened, but the tree was literally twisted. Multiple twists. And it continued to grow. But it had these multiple twists in it, like somewhere along the line when it was young, something came up to it and couldn't snap it and just twisted it. And then it just grew like that. And I mean, it's big now. It's like this big around. But, well, maybe bigger now, but when I was a kid, it was about this big around. But it was twisted like this. And it was multiple twists. It wasn't just a single twist. It was multiple twists. And so there was all these strange things that, we realized that we never thought about that, have happened around our property. And it was just a really surreal. And from that day forward, I've always, I've had no problem believing that, Sasquatch exists. It's just, and, I live in Florida now, and there's at least a couple instances where I've been out in the Ocala forest. Me and my wife were out in the Ocala forest a couple times, and there's been times where we've been out there where it just, that dead, eerie silence, and I just, I've never really explained it to her. I'm like, let's go, and and the thing is, you get a mile down the road and then you can hear all the crickets and everything going in the woods again, and it's just, it's freaky. It's one of the things that have always spooked me out. It sucks because I drive a truck, and one of the things I love is that, like right now I'm out here and I'm comfortable because there's other trucks here around me, so I'm not by myself, even though I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. But, you know, I had this one night where I was up in Oregon and I couldn't get out the truck. I wanted so bad to get out the truck, but I was parked on the top of this mountain and I'm all by myself and I'm looking out through the windshield and I can see the stars in ways that I've never seen them before. And I wanted to get out the truck so bad to be able to see these stars. And I mean, it's I'm sorry, it's heartbreaking because I was the only truck there on this pull off, and I wanted so bad for another truck to come that night so I could get out of my truck, and I just wanted to look at these stars. I wouldn't even roll down my windows. It's just, I can handle being in the truck, and you know, I wouldn't turn off. I had the truck running. I mean, if something happened, I just wanted to be able to go. But it's something that haunts me. It's still 33 years later, and I mean, it's sorry, it's bringing me to tears, man. It haunts me, and it's something I've never been able to get over. And I just thought it'd be, you know, I've shared this story a couple times with a couple of them other, but nobody's ever replied to me about it or nothing. Or so I just thought I'd record this for you because it's the best way to tell you the story. Rather, it would take me hours to type this all out on. So it just seemed to make more sense to make this video for you, to tell you the story and explain it all. And I mean, if you want to share the story, please be more than welcome to. I guess if anything, just, you know, share it. Whether you want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Put it into a format where you can tell the story, or if you want to let the story be told in my own words, just maybe do it with something where it's, you know, only the audio. This way, you know, people don't start picking on my dad and my uncle. I mean, I'm not too worried about it. I mean, I know what I saw. My dad still won't admit what we saw, and my Uncle Harry, we all talk about it within the family. I mean, but, you know, I don't want, you know, people picking on, especially my Uncle Harry. He's really traumatized by it, even worse than I am. It's really affected him. But please, you know, you can share the story. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not afraid of it or nothing like that. I mean, I've shared the story with a few people, but I just wanted to share the story with you. It's one of the most surreal experiences I've ever had in my whole life.